Alright, we're looking at a 2011 Honda CRV, or not 11, 2014 Honda CRV. It's got the 2.4 K24 engine in it, and it has a timing chain slap. You kind of hear it when you start it up and rev it a little. I'll go ahead and show you that real quick, and then we'll go ahead and put a new timing chain on this and guides. It's kind of weird. It only does it right off of idle, it seems like. So if it's idle, you can't really hear it, and then once you rev it up a little bit, you'll hear it for a split second, like the chain. It takes the guy a second to tighten the chain, or the timing chain tensioner. Anyway, I'll show you that, and then we'll start tearing this thing down and get it back together. Alright, right now, since it's cold, you only hear it right when it first starts up. So I'll see if I can get it caught for you on camera. Hopefully you heard that. When it's cold, it only does it right when you start it up, and then once it warms up and the idle comes down, you can get it to do it off idle. I don't want it to get that warm right now because I want to tear this engine apart, but hopefully you heard it. It's like that little almost rattle or knocking noise right at the start up. That's the chain tightening. So first thing we'll do is take this valve cover off. 10mm bolts right here. Takes this cover off. And that gets down to your coils, and those are also 10mm, and we'll pull those out one by one real quick and start getting the. Alright, so go ahead and take this cover off for the coils. All it is a plastic cover that goes over the ignition coils. The ignition coils you're just going to want to unplug. Press down on the tab at the back, and so you hear a little snapping noise. Get them unplugged and then start taking them out. Those are 10mm too. And they just pull straight out. Then you got a couple hoses. You got this one here that goes to the valve cover, and I believe there's a couple brackets, 10mm, that go this way into the valve cover to hold some of the wiring harnesses. You got to pull all that loose, and then we'll go for these 10mm bolts for the valve cover. But yeah, you got one here. There's a bolt here and a bolt here that go into the valve cover sideways, the whole brackets, and those have to come out. And then you got a couple hoses, and then the valve cover should pretty much come out of there. I'm going to go ahead and do that real quick, and then I'll pick it back up. Alright, so I already got the valve cover loose. Just take all the 10mm nuts. There's some in the back here, and then the ones in the front. And just, I kind of pry on it gently up here, and get it loose. And if you got all those bolts in the back of the valve cover loose, and you have the hose off, it should pretty much just lift out of there. Oh yeah, dipstick tube's in there too. Might want to pull that out before you take it out. And this job here, you may want to get a new valve cover gasket. This car actually has a new valve cover gasket on it. They're reusable, it's rubber. So we won't need to do that on this car, but the valve cover gasket was just changed about a month ago, so it's good. But if it's the original valve cover gasket or whatever, it'd be a good time to change it. So anyway, what we're going to do now is jack the car up, take the wheel off on the passenger side. That'll give us access to the crankshaft pulley. We need to get to that, put it in top dead center, and then remove the serpentine belt and this motor mount here, and that'll give us access to this cover that we're going after. You have to pull this timing chain cover off. There's quite a few bolts to hold it on. I think they're all 10 millimeter, and we'll go from there. So the first thing we'll do, we'll just jack this thing up, get it on a jack stand, get the wheel off, and go from there on it. Take a look and see what we got to do. Alright, so I got the wheel off, got it jacked up, got the engine, I got a block under the engine to hold it up. And I'm going to go ahead and take this motor mount off first and get it out of the way so I can see more what I'm doing. You have to pull that apart anyway because it's attached to the timing cover. So regardless, you're going to be taking it off. I'm going to go ahead and take it off first before I do anything else. 17 mil to get the dog bone out. Alright, sorry about that. I know nobody wants to hear that compressor kick on. So this is what I was going after. You have, it's like this on the engine. You have 3 17 mils right here. There's one on the dog bone that's up here on the frame. You'll see it. You pull the dog bone out. There's one right here, 10 millimeter for a ground strap. And then these two here, 19 millimeter. Those go to the engine. So this mounts to another mount on the firewall over there. We're going to pull that out of the way too. It's 3 bolts, and that'll give us access to that timing cover and a few of the bolts. So I'm going to go ahead and pull that off. You'll see it when you get in there, over there. It's just a big pedestal that this bolts to, basically a motor mount. And you got the dog bone, then you got the actual motor mount, which is what we're going to take off next. 3 bolts, 17 mil, I believe. Take those off, and then we'll go ahead and pull the serpentine belt and start looking at what we need to do to get that cover off. But I'll pull that motor mount off real quick and I'll show it to you. And then alright, so I went ahead and pulled that motor mount off. Here it is right here, and it's 3 bolts, like I said, 17 mil. Got one here, one here, one here. Pretty easy to get off. And once you get this out of the way, it kind of opens up your wheel well over there to get to your timing cover and all that good stuff. So I'm going to go ahead and pull the serpentine belt off and start pulling the bolts off on the timing cover. Not sure how much of that I can show you, but I will let you know some of the highlights here. We're going to have to pull that crank pulley off. I have a special tool for that. I see a lot of guys struggling with that, and it's not necessary. There's a way around that. It's super easy to get these bolts off, the crank bolt off. I still see even some of these, good techs just don't know about it. So there's a lot of good mechanics out there that just don't even know about this tool that I have. And then there's a lot of people that do, but I'll show you the 19mm crank bolt. These Hondas have always been real hard to get off, and there's a way around that. Super easy, pretty affordable, and if you work on Hondas a lot, it's worth investing in. So anyway, I'll look at what I got going on. I know I'm going to pull that serpentine belt off next, and I also at some point need to put it in top dead center before we get too far along. I'll kind of show you the marks, or try to, once we get it in top dead center. Alright, so I got it lined up on top dead center. If you look down here, I don't know if I can really get you in there. I'll try as best I can. If you look down in here, there's a mark on the timing cover, and then I have a white dot marking the actual pulley. I don't know if you can see that. I hope you can. And then up here on the camshafts, you have an arrow up on the intake camshaft. Sorry about this lighting and stuff. It's pretty hard to... So anyway, there's an arrow off that points up, and then you should have a dash, 2 marks on each camshaft pulley that line up, and I believe there's an arrow on this one too on the exhaust. I can't remember, but if the 2 marks are facing each other on your pulleys and it's lined up down there, then you should be on top dead center. The other thing too is your camshaft should not be pressing down any of the valves. It should be closed. So that's how you check that. So anyway, I'm going to go ahead and pull that pulley off next. And the way I do it, it shouldn't move the engine over, so you don't have to worry about blocking the engine or anything. And then we'll go ahead and take that pulley off. And then the last thing would be just take the rest of this cover off. I got most of the bolts up top out. They're all 10mm except for the actual motor mount bracket here. And it won't come out all the way until you get the cover out, because it's got a really long bolt that goes through the back, and the frame kind of catches it. So, but you can move it around to get to the rest of the bolts until you're ready to take the cover off. So I'm going to go ahead and take that crankshaft pulley off, and then we'll take this cover off and get down to business. Alright, so if you've seen my other Honda videos, you know I use the Lyle 77080 on these crank bolts. It's a special socket. It's a real thick walled socket, and it doesn't allow the impact to dissipate the power as much. So I'm going to put her on reverse here and make sure she's plugged in. That's, like I said, this is the Lyle 77080 socket. There is other ways to get this bolt off, but this is I've never had a problem using this socket. So here we go. We'll see if we can get it loose. There you go. Now Honda or whoever does sell a tool to put in here to hold it, and then you try to crank on it by hand. But I've had this particular socket for a couple of years now. Never had a problem with it getting them off, and it's pretty affordable. It's 30 or 40 bucks. The Lyle 77080. Get it on Amazon or wherever, and it rips these things right off with a good impact. So now that that's off, we'll go ahead and pull the actual pulley off, which should just pull right off. And then take the rest of these bolts off for the timing cover, and then we'll, it's already in top dead center. We'll double check top dead center before we tear it apart all the way, and then we will start getting the chain off and the guides and all that good stuff. Alright, once you get that crankshaft pulley bolt off and the pulley off, just go ahead and take all the bolts out around the perimeter of this timing cover. They're all 10mm. You don't have to take off the tensioner plate yet, because we're just going to take the tensioner loose. We're not going to mess with there's a procedure on taking the tension off the tensioner and blocking it, but since we're going to take it off completely, the kit we got comes with a new tensioner and everything. I just left this on. I'll have to take it off when I put the new one on to keep it blocked, but we'll go over that in a little bit. There is some bolts that go up through the bottom of the oil pan to the cover. There's three of those, so you will have to take those off. And remember, you can't get this bracket here out with the cover on because the bolt's too long. So what you do is, once you get this cover loose, pull it up a little bit, far enough to get this bolt where it should be. Pull this off first, and then you can go ahead and pull this out from the top. You can probably pull it out from the bottom too, but I just go ahead and pull it out from the top. So I'm going to go ahead and clean up the surfaces on this, and then we're going to go about changing the chain and the guides. I'll show you the kit that I got, and we'll change the guides and the chain on that, and you know, make sure it's still on top dead center, and then we'll start taking it apart and putting the new stuff on. Alright, so this is the kit we got for it. It's actually a Duralast kit. I'm not a big fan of AutoZone. Well, I mean, they're okay, but price was kind of an issue with this, and O'Reilly's and the other guys didn't really sell kits for it. AutoZone was the only one I could find, other than, you know, the factory kit, and I think Napa had one for like $600. This one comes with all the guides. Comes with a new tensioner. It's got the pin in it already locked. You don't want to pull this out until you're ready to, until everything's set up. It's got the new chain, of course. So that's what we got on this car. So I'm going to go ahead and go over there and start pulling. Make sure it's still in top dead center, and then we'll start pulling probably the main guide off and the tensioner, and we'll pull the chain off, and then we'll start replacing these guides and put the new chain on, and then you know, you install this and have everything installed, and then you pull this pin out, and that's what tensions everything to the correct tension. So anyway, I'm going to go over there and start on that. It's all pretty self-explanatory, but I'll show you kind of what I'm doing, and then we'll get this new stuff on there and start putting this thing back together. Alright, before I go over this, I want to highly recommend that you get a book or a manual when you do this. This video is just going to be kind of a guide on how to do this, just because of the camera angles and the things that I can't really show that well on the camera. I would just use this video as a guide, and make sure you get yourself, if you haven't done these before, make sure you get yourself a book or a manual on how to do this. This here is the factory timing chain that came off. I don't know if you can see here. This is a little bit of a brighter gold. This is the crankshaft because it's only got one link that's brighter gold. And if you come up here, you can see this one's a brighter gold. There's two links, and then not too far from there should be two more links that are brighter gold. That's your intake and exhaust camshafts. That's where those line up on the marks, and then the single one down here is where the crankshaft. Now on this chain here, it's even harder to see. I don't even know if the camera will pick it up. It's all pretty much, there's like a silver link right here. I marked it with a black marker just for myself so I don't lose track of it. And then up here, it's the same situation. You have two silver links, not too far apart, intake and cam. And the arrow on your camshaft is where this goes in between these two links. So that's how you would line them up. This one's quite a bit harder to see where the special links are at. And that's kind of like one of the downfalls of buying, you know, a Duralast kit or an aftermarket kit versus you know, something like this from the factory. But anyway, you need to find two pairings that are not too far apart. Those are your camshaft, and then you find one that's pretty far apart, and that'll be your crankshaft. So I'm going to go ahead and set that on there, set this chain on there, and then we'll start putting the guides back together and all that good stuff. One thing I want to make clear about this timing cover, there is no gasket for it. I used the gray import gasket sealer for this. Just put a light bead on it, and then underneath here where your oil pan goes, you want to put a super light bead under there. That's a spot where you could leak if you don't put enough sealant on there, but you don't want to glunk it on. Just put on, you know, a nice tight bead up and down here on the bottom of the oil pan especially. And be careful when you put this back on not to lose all the sealant off of this when you put it on the oil pan. And that's about it. But I just want to kind of mention that again because there is no gasket, and you know, the sealer that you use is kind of personal preference. I like to use the gray import Permatex import gasket sealer or gasket maker. Some of the stuff you got to watch. They want you to cure it for 24 hours. Then some of it's not you know, doesn't take as long. So just kind of keep an eye on that. Make sure you know what you're getting before. All right, so this is where I'm at on. I've got both the guides installed. You know, on this one you have the arrow and the two color links are in the middle of that. The exhaust camshaft has a dot. The two color links in the middle of that. Then you have the two marks right here that line up. And then down below on the camshaft, or crankshaft I mean, you can see I got this off. And sorry about this camera, guys. The multicolored link is on the spot on the crankshaft. So that's pretty much how it's all lined up. And then once you get it lined up, you'll want to pull the pin out of your tensioner down there. I'm sorry guys about this video. I don't know how well it's going to turn out. It's kind of hard to get in here and do all this and kind of show you. But down there, right there is my tensioner. You see it's got that pin sticking out, that little red pin. So once everything's lined up and you've triple checked it and everything's tight, you can go ahead and pull that pin, and you know, then you can normally you know, if you got all the colors lined up on your chain to the marks, you should be good to go. I'm going to pull the pin, and what I do is put the crankshaft pulley back on. I rotate it 360 just to make sure all the lines line back up. Now if you rotate this after you pull that pin, when you come back around, the colored links on this chain will not line back up with the marks. It'll take several rotations for that to happen, just so you know. So if you rotate it 360, what you're looking for is the arrow up, the dot up, those two lined up in the middle, and then your crankshaft lined up. Once you rotate this once, you know, it'll take a long time for the different color links to line back up with the mark. So don't worry about that. If that happens, that's not a big deal. It's not totally normal. What you're looking for when you rotate it is to make sure that these two are lined up, the one down below is lined up, and that they're facing at 12 o'clock or close to 12 o'clock. So there's no gasket on this timing cover. You got to use liquid gasket, and you got to be careful. Don't gunk it on real heavy. Just, you know, put it on a light coat and start putting it back together. After that, there's nothing really else to say about it. You're just going to put it back together the way it came. Don't forget to pull your pin on the tensioner, put the cover back on, and then just put everything back together. Like I said, this isn't so much an instructional video as it is just to show you kind of what's involved with it. I really highly suggest, unless you've done these before, timing chains, to get a book or a manual or something and get yourself familiar with the marks here, because I can't really show you with the camera and get in there. If I could, I would, but with the engine being in the car, it's almost impossible. So my suggestion to you, if you haven't done one of these, is to go ahead and get a book or a manual, look it over real well, read the instructions, understand what the marks are, and then put it together. Don't just go off of this video because you know, it's just too hard for me to get in there and show you everything. Now these camshafts, you can get a locking kit for the back. They go in the back of the camshafts, and it locks the camshafts in place while you're putting the chain on. I don't have that kit. I don't use it. These are pretty. They stay pretty much where they're at. Usually I get it close, and then I just rotate the camshaft just a hair, one way or the other, to line the chain up the first time. But if you know, it's not a bad investment if you're going to keep working on these Hondas. I probably should get it myself, but I've just never had a problem with these moving around too much when I put the chain on, so I've never gotten the tool. As long as you have those links in the right spot, you're good to go. So anyway, I think I'm going to go ahead and end it here and go get some lunch and then come back and put this thing back together. Like I said, it's just putting all those bolts back in, the timing cover, motor mount, valve cover, all that good stuff, and then taking it for a spin. It's not a super hard job, but you definitely don't want to be off on any of these marks. or you'll get, these are interference engines, so you will get piston to valve clearance issues, and you could ruin an engine or a head. So be sure you know what you're doing, what you're getting into, and be sure you understand how all these marks are on all these places before you put it back together and try to start it. And like I said, just for me, my personal, what I do is I pull that pin out and then I rotate it by hand twice just to make sure all the marks line back up before I put it back together. I mean, it should 100% be lined up because it's lined up right now. Then once you pull the pin, the tension goes on there and then you're good to go. But for me personally, I always just double check it. It's just I do that with timing belts, chains, whatever. So anyway, I hope this helps. This kind of gives you an idea what's involved putting a timing chain on this. Not too bad, like I said, but just, you know, be familiar with what you're doing before you start it. And the only other thing is that Lyle socket will help you get that bolt off. Without that, that's going to be a big pain in the butt trying to get that crankshaft bolt off. There's, like I said, there's other tools to do it, but that's the best one I found with the impact. So anyway, I'm going to get this thing back, put the button back up, and get back on the road. I'll see you on the next one. Thanks for watching, and God bless.